So thank you to everyone that's joining us both in person and online for today's Lunch and Learn. I wanted to welcome everyone to Untold Stories of Orlando Collected. We'll be leaving questions for the end of the presentation, so if you have any, please just hold on to them for me. We'll leave some time for that. But I'm Emily Coughlin. I'm the collections manager here at the Orange County Regional History Center. And I've worked with a lot of people in this room for this exhibit to come together. You were supposed to be hearing from both me and our registrar, Kara, but unfortunately she's a little under the weather today. So bear with me if I screw up her portion of the presentation. I'm very sorry. I'm going to probably end up reading that. If you have not visited the exhibition, I highly recommend that you do. It's on the second floor. Our curator of exhibits has put together an artifact guide, so make sure you take one of those with you as well. That has a lot of extra stories, extra information in it about the exhibit, but these are some of the things that we found most interesting to work with. So we'll start with one of our community curators. So the community curators were people throughout the community or businesses or organizations that we felt it would be important to work with for this exhibit. They either lent something from their personal collection or from their business, or they chose something from our collection to represent them. And one of these was the Orlando Public Library, which I'm sure you guys know is right across the street. And one of the things that we took from them was an original accession book. It's the earliest donation from the first years of the library, making it over 100 years old. And the library was established in 1922 as a result of Captain Charles Albertson's donation of his personal collection of 12,000 books to the city of Orlando. His gift stipulated that a public library must be built so to house the collection and that it be called the Albertson Library to make these accessible to the public. But by 1954, it was determined the library had outgrown the building. So in 64, it was demolished and a new building was constructed. It opened in 1966 and was renamed the Orlando Public Library. But just 8 years later, it was determined that once again, the library had outgrown its space. But instead of starting from scratch this time, they decided to just do an expansion in 1985, which gives you the library that we have today. The other artifact that we borrowed from the library was in the children's section. If you've been over there, you've probably seen it. There's actually two of them. We took one. The one we took is the Wonderful Lizard of Oz, and it was part of the Lizard initiative that ran in the from late 2000 to early 2002. And this was done. They do this all over the country. I don't know if you've probably seen it in other places. Where I grew up, it was cows. In Orlando, it was lizards. So there were 50 lizards that were designed by local artists, and they were set up throughout the city in places like the airport, Lake Eola, City Walk, and even Lou Gardens. They were inspired by Chicago's Cows on Parade, a concept modeled after a similar art project in Zurich from 1998. I did not grow up in Chicago, but I grew up in central Pennsylvania, so we had cows. Many other cities have done similar projects like Cincinnati, Buffalo, Virginia Beach, with different animals that represent their areas. But of course, Orlando settled on lizards because they are literally everywhere. Manatees were considered, but that doesn't quite fit Orlando because we don't have a ton of manatees here. And they considered alligators and mosquitoes, but lizards were way more whimsical than mosquitoes. The statues were made of fiberglass, and the artists had to submit their design proposals. Sponsors would choose to fund the materials, as well as a $1,000 prize for the artist. 180 artists proposed over 700 designs, and the lizards were on display for about a year and then auctioned off, with the proceeds going to the arts community. So the Lizard of Oz was done by Elaine LaCour. And before it came to live at the library, he sat right outside our building in Heritage Square Park. Unfortunately, many of the lizards, including the Lizard of Oz, were damaged or vandalized during their time outside. He had his crystal ball stolen once, but twice. Not once, but twice. His hat was knocked off and found in the nearby bushes. And the artist said that the crystal ball is not easy to remove, so these people must have been determined. It really is stuck on there, which will make sense in a second. Unfortunately, all the repairs were done at the artist's expense, so many of them lost the $1,000 that they were given for creating the lizards in the first place. This lizard, this is why we know that that crystal ball and that hat are not going anywhere, because we moved him from the library. It took 3 staff members and a really wonky flat cart. We went down the street, because, of course, there's a cobblestone street behind the library. He would not fit through their front doors, so we had to go through the back, get him onto the cart. He's not terribly heavy, but he's awkward. And it took 2 of us, you can see in the picture with me walking behind laughing hysterically, to try to get this thing back to the museum. So something that is not mentioned in these notes, this was during the memorial service that's held every year for unhoused people in the park. We forgot that detail, so we're going down these cobblestones at like 9 a.m. on a Tuesday or whatever while this service is going on in the park. And we're trying to be quiet. We took him down the sidewalk. Every time we were on the cobblestones, like you hear Mayor Dyer speaking, you just hear bum, 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 bum. And the cart like doesn't go straight, so we're trying to straighten it while trying not to drop accession books and the lizard. So it was quite a task. He's about 7 feet tall, so he fit through our front doors, but once you walk into our lobby, the ceiling drops a little bit when you walk into where the exhibits are. We had to get him off the cart, put him on a blanket, drag him into the elevator, and then we had to get our exhibits team to help us drag him into the exhibit, and then we left him on that blanket probably up until he had to be set for the it was like a month. Yeah, the exhibits team finally was like, we're done. We're just going to place him. Because we just left him there. But since then, he has been a favorite. As we were working on the exhibit, we were sending pictures to friends and family. My little sister said it's her favorite thing. She hasn't even seen the exhibit. One of the campers married him. I meet with the campers once a week, and one of the girls asked if I met her husband, which is apparently the lizard. And when they're in the exhibit, she has other kids stand in front of him and act like security to protect her husband. So this thing has been quite interesting to have on the premises. We've all kind of fallen in love with him. In addition to the community curated objects, there was a lot of space to fill from within. So all the staff was asked to choose something in our collection that would be in the exhibit to kind of represent themselves. Or if you had a favorite thing, if you were interested in sports, we would try to send you a list of things sports related that you could choose something. Because outside of the collections department, not a lot of our staff has a grasp on what we have because we have a ton of stuff. So something that represents our local business section is items that pertain to Gary's Duck Inn. So Gary's Duck Inn was opened in 1945 by Gary Starling. It was located on South Orange Blossom Trail, which is still a pretty major tourist highway. And it opened with 15 seats and served reasonably priced seafood. It was very successful. Tourists loved it. And they renovated because they had to expand. So when they reopened in 1949, they had AC, a private dining room, a lengthened bar. They tripled the size of their kitchen and, of course, increased parking for all of their guests. And the whole purpose of this restaurant, Gary Starling said, was to make a homey, comfortable, clean place where customers can enjoy good food at reasonable prices. He was famous for his fried shrimp and the key lime pie, which are seen in a lot of his ads. And you can even see there's a recipe for the key lime pie up here on the screen. I can put that up later if anyone wants a picture of it. But it eventually drew some interested investors. So in 1963, Gary sold the business to Bill Darden and Charlie Woodsby. And Darden was a restaurateur who opened his first restaurant when he was 19 in Georgia, and it was called the Green Frog. And they were so impressed by his ability to offer seafood in a landlocked city, which in the 60s was not that common, that it inspired them to open Red Lobster in 1968 in Lakeland. So the second menu you can see is from Red Lobster. We learned that, obviously it was very successful, but we learned that they sold about 25,000 pounds of shrimp per year. And as more restaurants opened on OBT, crime rates increased. And of course, there were a lot of attractions, but as Disney started to open and Universal started to open, people didn't really go that way as much. So it did end up closing. Sorry, there's your Red Lobster menu. Apologies. It did end up closing in 1994, and now a 7-Eleven and Dollar General sit on the spot. And I'm sure if you live in the area or you look at the city when you're driving to Orlando, you've seen the building with the lobster on it. That is one of their office buildings. And it's right in downtown. You can see it from I-4. But while Red Lobster was flourishing in the first few years, they grew to 5 locations. In 1970, General Mills had purchased the first locations and created a chain with Darden and Woodsby, staying on to manage them. They introduced their famous Cheddar Bay biscuits in 1988 and used to offer hush puppies, but the biscuits were easier to produce, and they serve over 1 million a day, and you can buy the kits at the grocery store. If you haven't, highly recommend. They're very good. So the Darden restaurants operated 71 Red Lobster locations in each state besides Alaska. They also went on to operate other chains like Olive Garden, Longhorn Steakhouse, and Bahama Breeze. In 1997, the Red Lobster was relocated to out front of Lakeland Square Mall and is still open today. Darden's other restaurants were outperforming Red Lobster, and they tried to expand outside of seafood, but seafood was, for a reasonable price, had been their appeal, and to offer more variety with lesser quality or higher prices just did not work out for them. So by 2013, Darden wanted to separate from Red Lobster and sold it to Golden Gate Capital for $2.1 billion. In 2014, company headquarters were moved here to Orlando at the C&L Center City Commons, where City Hall sits on South Orange Avenue, and as I said, you can still see the building today. Casual dining was becoming less popular, and other chains were still outperforming, so the restaurant sold again in 2020. And by 2024, 99 of their locations had been closed, and they had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The new CEO, however, plans to save Red Lobster and has a history of working with investment companies to restructure restaurants that are in trouble, including P.F. Chang's. And he was the CEO of P.F. Chang's for 4 years and brought it back to profitability. He's only 36, and he's the youngest Red Lobster CEO. And lately, he brought seafood boils to the menu, and they have become one of their very popular items, and the brand is beginning to see some revitalization with some of the changes that are being made. One of the other things that was brought into the exhibit, we were actually pretty fortunate to get as a donation within the last 2 years. Yes, 2 years? A year and a half? Okay. We worked with Lou Gardens to obtain some of their things that they couldn't really use on the premises anymore. So this brings us to an Orlando legend, Harry P. Lou. And these are 2 of Kara's favorite items in the entire exhibit. She was the one that picked these. The first is the mailbag that was used by Harry P. Lou Inc., as well as the portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Lou. I will admit, when we first saw these things and were offered them, I thought the portrait was cool, but I wasn't totally sold on it, and Kara kind of tucked it away with the other stuff we were packing up so that it would end up at the museum, even if I said no to it. And it's actually become a favorite amongst the staff because they just look so precious. But as I said, they were recent acquisitions. This is the first time they've ever been displayed. And I'm sure everyone here has heard of Lou Gardens, and that was a huge part of Mr. Lou's legacy. Before the House and Gardens, Lou was a big name in the industrial business in Orlando. He was an Orlando native born on North Orange Ave in 1884, and he worked as a stable boy and by 1904 was working at Kane O'Berry Boiler Co. on Livingston Street. Kane O'Berry mainly provided repair work for large machinery and boilers. So he worked his way up the ladder and bought the company in 1926, renaming it Harry P. Lew, Inc. After that, he bought 4 acres on Atlantic Coastline at Garland Street and remodeled the existing structure into a 2-story building. He discontinued the repair work and focused on the industrial supplies and equipment where he thought he could make the most money. He became one of Florida's largest distributors of industrial supplies and expanded into Miami, Tampa, and West Palm Beach. He quietly sold the company to Paul Stein in 1940, but remained as president and chairman of the board until his retirement in the 1950s. He did more than run an industrial supply company. He was very active in promoting the growth of Orlando and was instrumental in highway, rail, and harbor improvements that brought more industry to our area. In the 1930s, he and other local businessmen approached the Orlando Civic Club to hold weekly meetings at work on promoting the city of Orlando, which caused massive growth for the city. The group became the Orlando Chamber of Commerce. They worked with city officials to help them purchase the Orlando Electric Plant, which was owned by the Cheney family, which now operates as Orlando Utilities Commission, and it's the city's largest income source. And we've been asked several times. He was asked several times to run for office, but he declined every time. He felt he could do more with what he was doing behind the scenes rather than being the public face of the city. His wife, Mary Jane, was also active in the community. She was a member of St. James Catholic Church, the Rosalind Club, the Cirrhosis Club, Merritt Park Garden Circle, Orlando Rotary Club, and the Country Club of Orlando. They never had children. It was just the 2 of them. But a fun story, it wasn't fun. I shouldn't say it was a fun story, but I think it was a funny story looking back, was that Harry was actually kidnapped at one point. On a Saturday evening in 1939, he was walking home from work on Livingston Street and was confronted and robbed by 3 men. They drove him in his own car to West Orange County, and apparently the men wanted to kill him, but he offered them all the money he had on him and his keys to his 1939 Packard sedan, so they left him there and took off. The men were later captured in Tallahassee and with the car and served jail time. Some people confuse this story and think he was murdered during this time, but he went on to live several more decades, and the men who kidnapped him were actually 3 teenagers, and he appeared in court, and he did everything in his power to make sure that they served time for what they did to him. So on to Lew Gardens. The property was originally acquired by David Mizell in 1858, and they were one of the first families to develop the area, and he served as the sheriff of Orange County. They farmed cotton, corn, and sugarcane on the property, and the Mizell family plot is still on the land, and descendants can go see it. It's gated off. We're told that if you're a descendant, they'll let you in, but the general public doesn't get to go into the cemetery. In 1902, the property was purchased by Duncan Pell, who came from New York with his wife Helen Gardner, a silent film star, and first woman to own her own production company. They only lived there for a handful of years before separating. In 1906, the Woodward from Birmingham purchased the home and property as a winter retreat. In 1936, the Lews bought it and turned it into what it is today. Harry always had a passion for exotic plants and flowers and brought many back from his travels, especially camellias and azaleas, which were cared for by Ernest Bradley, whose wife was also the cook on the property. Those 2 were the property caretakers. And the Bradleys and the Lews became very close friends, and Mr. Bradley loved the garden as though it were his own. They provided cuttings for some of his plants to build projects around Orlando. So some of the plants that we have throughout the city are from Lew Gardens. And the property was donated to the city in 1961 to serve as a public garden. The plant's educational programs and community engagement expanded from the 60s to the 80s, and Mary Jane remained on the board until her death in 1986. Harry lived to see some of it. He had passed away in 1977. And, fun fact, the Historical Society of Central Florida helped to furnish and maintain the house in the early years of the museum. The first house museum opened for touring in Orange County, listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. So I heard recently that they're not opening the house as much, but if you get in there, a lot of the stuff was donated to the Historical Society, and on behalf of those people, we put it in the Lou House, and a lot of it is still there. All right, hopefully this part I know a little bit better. All right, so I am going to talk about Edith Royal. Again, if you go down to the exhibit, you will see we have her tap shoes and a pair of her ballet shoes on display. Those were my choice for the exhibit. I'd heard of Edith Royal, and I was a dancer, so of course I had to pick the ballerina as the thing I wanted in the exhibit. So Edith was born on October 22nd, 1918 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She did pass away in 1996 in Winter Park. She was 77 years old. But to her friends and family, she was affectionately known as Edie. And as a child, she was enrolled in dance classes by her mother. She was born 1918, flu, pandemic. So she was a kind of sickly child. Her mom thought she needs exercise, and she excelled at these dance classes and absolutely loved it. She went on to study with Florence Casanova, who was the person that trained Grace Kelly when she was a young dancer. And later, after she married her husband, they moved to Orlando because her husband's company transferred him here. She wanted to continue to dance, but the only dance school in Central Florida was the Ebsen School of Dance. It was run by C.L. Ebsen. He was the father of Buddy Ebsen, if anybody has seen Buddy Ebsen in old Hollywood films. He was supposed to be the Tin Man, but was allergic to the paint for The Wizard of Oz. That's like the most known story about Buddy Ebsen. So she went to the class. The instructor didn't show up. So she decided to just teach the first class she went to, and Ebsen saw her and immediately hired her. So she taught for his studio for about 5 years, and in 1945 helped him to establish the Central Florida Dance Company. Eventually, Edith decided to go out on her own, and by 1948, not only had she gone out on her own, but the Royal School was holding their first ever dance recital at the Winter Park School, which is now the Winter Park Middle School. By 1951, the school moved and was located at 534 Chase Avenue in Winter Park, right by Lake Virginia. And the school was doing so well that in 1953, her husband, Bill, was able to leave his job at the canning company and join the school as her business manager. He also had an interest in tumbling and gymnastics. It's unclear whether he taught it, kind of doubt it, but he might have. He did? Were you one of her students?
I took tumbling.
Oh, there we go. He did teach tumbling. Sorry, I got really excited. So as their school continued to expand, they opened 2 additional schools. And when she retired in 1985, they sold the schools to 2 of her former students. And at the time, they had over 1,000 students enrolled. And many of her students did go on to become professional dancers or dance teachers or work within that field. And to a lot of Central Florida people, she is considered the mother of dance. Specifically to Kip Watson, who was one of her students. He is also a co-founder of the Southern Ballet Theater, which became the Orlando Ballet. Now, the big thing about Edith, she and her husband are the reason that we have the Nutcracker every year. She was the one who, in 1963, partnered with the Florida Symphony Orchestra and used her students to present the Nutcracker at the Municipal Auditorium. For the first year, they were barely able to fill any seats, but it ended up becoming an annual tradition, and by her retirement, they were doing 5 shows so that they could kind of fulfill demand for all the tickets. And eventually, the tradition was taken over by Southern Ballet Theater, which was founded in 1979 by some of her former students. And she trained 3 generations of dancers, and as I said, a lot of them went on to work within the performing arts. And students still talk about her to this day. And when she passed away, a lot of them signed something we recently acquired. It's a 6.5 foot by like 3 foot poster of Edith that students signed with messages and everything when she passed away. Another cool thing with an interesting backstory that's in the exhibit is the Sadler Hotel. So I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Sadler. It was opened by Henry Sadler, who was born in Newberry, South Carolina in 1907. And he became a pioneer in the African American business community in Orlando. He moved to Orlando in 1928 and became a bellman at the San Juan Hotel. In 1963, with some funding from some good people, as well as some guidance from some higher-up officials within the community, he opened the Sadler Hotel at 619 West Church Street. And I recently found out, too, the hotel's architect's name was Joe Schifalo. I didn't get to do much more research on him, but it's rare with these kind of things because it was a hotel that was owned by a black man in the 1960s. It's rare that you find who the architect was. Hotel Sadler was a 2-story structure with 28 rooms. It included a coffee shop called Mitchell's Coffee Shop and even boasted a full-size swimming pool, which not even a lot of the big resorts in this area had yet, at least in Orlando. Their tagline was that they catered to colored clientele, and throughout its history, they hosted baseball players, Tupperware dealers, James Brown, Ray Charles, and a lot of other more notable people locally. But the hotel really made headlines in 1964 because of the Minnesota Twins baseball team. So everyone knows that Florida is fairly famous for spring training. Not so much Orlando anymore, but Tinker Field used to be used for spring training. And the Minnesota Twins were coming here to do their spring training. Obviously, you can't really do that in Minnesota. So they settled on Orlando, and they came here from 1936 to 1991. Now, at the time, this was the 1960s, the team itself was integrated, but their accommodations and everything they did outside of Tinker Field was not. In 1962, they still hadn't been integrated. They promised by 1961 they would be. And which was a year after it had been promised, so people back in Minnesota started pushing for the change, so much so that Governor Elmer Anderson even got involved. The team headquarters was Cherry Plaza, and at the time, Cherry Plaza would not allow non-white people to stay in the hotel. So the governor of Minnesota was exchanging letters with the general manager of the hotel, pushing them to accept the black players from the Minnesota Twins because this was their headquarters for spring training. Unfortunately, the hotel, Cherry Plaza, stuck to their policies and would not allow them to stay there. So because of Mr. Sadler, that is where the 5 black players on the team stayed. They would stay at the Sadler Hotel while the rest of the officials were fighting out whether or not they could get Cherry Plaza to integrate. They understood the accommodations weren't quite as nice as what their other players experienced, but they had a pool and the people at Cherry Plaza did not. They also did not have to put up with the bed checks and the curfews because all the coaches were white and they were at Cherry Plaza, not at the Sadler Hotel. So they hated it, but they also enjoyed it. Earl Beatty, who was their catcher at the time, said of the need for integration that it was no reflection on Henry Sadler's business, that the Sadler has a good coffee shop and there are 3 or 4 good restaurants for them in Orlando, so he was fine with it. One of their coaches was the one who was quoted in the paper saying about the curfews and everything, that these guys actually kind of get off easy because they don't have to deal with it. And then Tony Oliva, who was one of their, he was a player in the 1960s and then went on to become the batting coach. And when it was announced in 1990 that the Minnesota Twins were going to relocate to Fort Myers for their spring training, he was one of the ones that was quoted saying that he was really sad about it because he made friends here. This was his 3rd home. He was from Cuba. Minnesota was his second home, and Orlando was his third. And he was really going to miss coming here every year. He was kind of struggling with the reality that he wouldn't be back. But it ended up happening partially because the city of Orlando refused to do $5 million of upgrades to Tinker Field so that the team could stay, because all the other big league teams were in state-of-the-art stadiums, and these guys were at an older one. But in the meantime, the team had integrated and moved to the Downtowner Motel in Orlando, and that became their new headquarters. So they got everybody out of the Sadler and Cherry Plaza. Years later, Henry Sadler, according to his daughter, was eager to get out of that area because of growing crime rates. So he sold the hotel to a group of black businessmen. In 1973, he went on to work as the Goodwill Ambassador and Guest Relations at the Court of Flags, which is now the Delta Resort. And in 1998, he had done so well that the general manager of the Delta Orlando Resort nominated Sadler for the award of Florida Guest Services Employee of the Year. He won the award, and the whole team took him to Tallahassee for the ceremony. He was also gifted with a VIP suite. The suite was named after him at the hotel. It was called the Sadler Suite. And after he sold the hotel, it unfortunately started to kind of fall into disrepair. In 1986, a portion of it was shut down because of a humanly caused fire. It was arson, but the newspaper said humanly caused instead of arson. And it was also riddled with fire code violations. So after that, the property was pretty much abandoned, and it was finally demolished by the city in 1989. And unfortunately, like I said, because it was a black-owned and operated hotel, there's pictures of it in newspapers. We have one postcard, a pamphlet. There's really not much that's left out there pertaining to it. Okay. So finally, I know I picked Edith's shoes, but that was because someone else picked this next item. This ended up becoming my favorite item in the entire exhibit. It required a custom case. Thanks to our exhibits team for putting up with me and my more or less demands on how to put this in the exhibit, or it wouldn't happen. But this pertains to Nellie Glennie Rybolt. Nellie was born on November 18th, 1881 in Greensburg, Indiana. And on September 6, 1905, she married someone that was pretty well known in Orlando, Carrie Hand. He was also from Indiana. And in 1907, the couple moved to Orlando so that Carrie, who was a trained embalmer, which was pretty rare at the time, could take over his father's business and eventually buy him out in 1914. Together, the Hand couple totally revolutionized the funeral business in Florida. They opened Florida's first funeral home with its own chapel and added the first crematory south of Washington, D.C. In 1936, the couple started a beloved tradition for the annual Central Florida Exposition. Each year, they would fund hot dogs, cotton candy, and admission for about 6,000 children so that they could attend the fair on that Friday. And they started doing this in 1936, and it just became an annual tradition, and it was an opportunity for kids who otherwise wouldn't be able to go to the fair to go and enjoy it. And for decades, Nellie was an integral part of her husband's business. She continued to manage it after his death, but eventually sold it on January 1st, 1947. She herself passed away on August 19th, 1950 in her Orlando home and is buried at Greenwood. So she was a pretty awesome person. She was very invested in the community, and a piece of her legacy, as I said, lives on at the History Center. If you go to the second floor, go see this. You can go see everything, but this is the big one. So I'm not sorry. So we are very fortunate to have Nellie's wedding dress in our collection. Like I said, she wore it in 1905, so it's over 100 years old, and it's featured in the exhibit. Her nephew, Howard Rybolt, and his wife donated the dress in 1979. And according to the paperwork, it was worn by Nellie when she married her husband in Indiana. And it actually gives a cool piece of information that her home was at the corner of Northwest Broadway and East Concord, and it had the first elevator in a residence in the area. But it's an Edwardian dress because 1905, Edwardian era, the neckline, it has a square neckline, and it's very gorgeous with all the lace and the beading. A lot of dresses like this were like buttons and all of that kind of stuff, but hers was handmade, and it's really neat because the whole thing is done with snaps instead of buttons. So if I can get this to play, I'm gonna let it play while I talk. Come on. All right. So this, if you're watching, it's a time-lapse video of us dressing the mannequin. So this was actually my favorite thing that I built for the entire exhibit. All the costumes and all the dresses, everything in the exhibit, I built the mounts for. So we would get an actual mannequin and then build it out so that it would properly fit the dress, because the mannequin that we had was too small, and the other one we had was too big. So I used archival materials like stockinette and polyfoam and everything like that to sew a body to this mannequin so that it would have a form that would fill out the dress without being too big or too small. So it looked almost, it's kind of ethereal when you look at it because it just kind of looks like it's floating there. But also to fill it out so it's not just laying flat, because that wasn't great for the dress anyways, because it's over 100 years old. Structurally, we couldn't hang it, so it couldn't be standing up. And this was what led to a custom case for it. We were discussing it one day, and the biggest reason I said it couldn't go in the exhibit was because it was fragile. We had to be careful with light. It had to be stable in the environment, and it could not be on a standing mannequin. There was absolutely no way, because it would stretch. So they said, all right, we'll build a custom case. We'll put in lighting that we can control. So it's in the center of the gallery, and the dress lays in this case, and so that's why we built the mannequin for it. But yes, that's a quick time lapse of us dressing it once it got here. Kara was kind enough to help with all of the polyfoam cutting. She kind of said it was like decorating a cake. She's like standing there like shaving little bits off of it. So you can see in the picture that it kind of looks like a mermaid until we get the dress on it. That's just so obviously there's no feet or anything. It's so that the dress doesn't just fall flat at the end. And we also use ethafoam in the arms, so that the arms have some structure as well. But this was the first thing we tried really hard as we were working on this exhibit. The one thing I kept saying was, I really don't want to say no. Don't pick things that make me say no. This was the first pick, and I had to say no. And then we thought about it, and I'm really glad that we were able to make it happen, because this is my favorite thing in the entire exhibit. It's all really, really cool, but this was a lot of fun to build. I don't know that the exhibit team feels the same way. Okay. But it was a lot of fun. And the whole exhibit is really cool. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you go down there. And if you have any questions, look through the booklet and everything. But yes, so no, not that. Okay. So, any questions for me, or Kara is here if anyone has questions.
Is the house still there
Nellie's? Oh, yeah. The question was, is the house still there on the corner of Broadway and East Concord? That I do not know, but I will try to find out for you. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Any online questions? What about Red Lobster? Mm-hmm. When did it open? Thank you. 1968. Red Lobster opened in 1968. Yes.
What were some of the things that you had to say no
Ah. Do you want to tell it or should I? So we have, I think, oh yes. The question was, what were some of the things you had to say no to? There was only one other thing, right? Oh yeah, somebody picked, when I said no to the wedding dress, the person who picked it picked a crocheted dress. So that's kind of why I went back to how can we make this wedding dress work, because that crocheted dress will be destroyed. But the one thing that I did have to say no to, we have in our collection an animatronic Dalmatian that is dressed like a fireman. It's like 5 feet tall, and it's supposed to speak. It was on loan to the Fire Museum for a long time, but he's dressed as a fireman, and he has a hat. His name is Sparky, and it was picked, and we looked at it, and it's wood. His hat has been broken multiple times and glued back together and painted over. His shirt was shredded at one point, so the shirt he's wearing is not even the shirt he came with. His jaw is cracked, his face is cracked. We looked at it, and I just kind of thought, there's a really good chance that when we pick this up, it's going to fall apart. So I did have to say no to that, and the staff member was not too pleased. So they picked the largest thing we have in the collection. So if you go down there and you see the Rexall sign that's on display, that was because I said no to Sparky. Any other questions? Yes. So how long is the exhibit on display? January 26th, Thank you. January 11th, 2026. Yep, so it'll be here till next year. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. So the question was, why is the court box sealed off? Yes, so when you go into the exhibit, there is the witness stand. So we have a courtroom in our building. This was originally the 1927 courthouse. During renovation to turn the courthouse into the museum, there was an electrical fire in the courtroom, which is why if you go into the courtroom and you look at the floor kind of up by the judge's bench, it's kind of black and, well, it's blocked off, but it's kind of gummy because it's cork floors. So there was an electrical fire, and it burned the judge's bench, the witness stand, took out the mural. So the witness stand that is on display in the exhibit is the burned witness stand from that courtroom. We stored everything that was burned. We have pretty much everything that was in that courtroom. So we have a huge piece of custom plex, bless you, custom plex over top of it because, true to form, opening night, a child tried to step into the box even though the entire thing is covered. It's really just there as a safety precaution because the varnish is peeling on the witness stand, and we're trying to protect that as best we can. And also so people don't pick at it, try to step in it. We don't actually know, because of the fire damage it sustained, if it would hold someone. If they did step into it, they might go right through it. So it's really just a safety precaution. Any other questions? Yes?
The original Red Lobster, you know where that was?
In Lakeland?
Yeah, because I know where the one is now.
Mhm. The question is, do we know where the original Red Lobster was in Lakeland? Where is it? Memorial Boulevard, Lake Parker. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming to today's program, and thank you for supporting our programming here at the History Center. We appreciate you being here.